record. All right, that way we'll get all the comments and stuff like that, which is kind of nice. Because from TikTok, we'll have the video, and I can give you that, and then you can play around with it and do whatever you want. But it wouldn't have the comments on the screen. And so this is kind of nice if you want to be able to review. Obviously, if we answer questions and stuff, we'll be able to refer to what the comments are. But it's just kind of a nice way to be able to do it. No, you're good. So, hey everybody, camera's way over there.
Look at this backdrop too.
Well, you know, I thought that'd be kind of fun rather than just a wall. I did one with Jillian Bettino.
Yeah, nice.
And Dr. Bettino, by the way, was running for U.S. Senate. She's now running for state treasurer. She's fantastic. I endorse her. Find Jillian, but she was coming down. She lives in Wausau. She was coming down. She was going to be out in Menominee Falls, and I had agreed to meet her and do one of these. But so we just wound up having a conference room with beige walls. So boring, so bad. And I'm like, okay, we need something a little bit more interesting. And so this is kind of fun. Okay, so I'm Adam Murphy, former candidate for U.S. Senate. This is Steven Olikara, current Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate and victor of the Democratic debate that just happened this weekend.
That's right.
So we didn't prep much for this, which is fun because it's live. So what did you think of the debate? What was your experience? First of all, because it's the only one that I've seen. And I would have loved to have participated, but I stepped out. So you guys weren't given questions.
That's right.
So what did you think of the questions, the format, your answers? Shoot.
First, it was a lot of fun, and it's a lot of fun to be here too, by the way. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.
Seriously, it's so cool, and thanks for welcoming me into your home. It's you've got the best TikTok account by far in Wisconsin politics, and just always appreciate your approach and your feedback. It really means a lot. So the debate itself was set up where this was the one shot. To get your message out to Wisconsin voters, the only televised debate. The answers, they told us ahead of time, would be limited to 60 seconds.
Which is brutal.
Brutal, yes. So efficiency is key. And they also said that if you were named in a response, you'd get a 30-second rebuttal, which disincentivizes you to actually critique other candidates.
To debate, right.
To essentially debate. And so you did see me take a few opportunities to highlight differences, but without naming other candidates. But one of my mentors once said that a true breakout moment in a campaign never happens in a vacuum. There are always smaller breakout moments leading up to it. So we had been seeing this dynamic at play at smaller forums on small business and entrepreneurship, at other candidate forums around the state, where we had very strong performances. And we were just waiting for the platform when the cameras were truly rolling and the platform was big enough. And so that's what happened with this debate. And as you referenced, the pundits the following morning suggested that we won the debate. And I think that was your analysis as well.
It was. I've got our live stream coming here so that I can see comments and stuff. And somebody said, why don't we do long form discussions with each candidate? And the simple answer is we can't, right? With everybody,
right.
So for perspective, so there were 5 candidates up there. It was an hour, which was short. You got 1 minute. You didn't know the questions ahead of time, and I want to say this because debates are always interesting. We had some video ones that were kind of, when I was running, we had like 9 or 10 of us, you know. And same thing, you got a minute, 2 minutes. We didn't have the questions ahead of time. But the problem with that, in my opinion, is a U.S. Senator never has to make a snap decision.
Right. That's true.
And so I think that structure where you're not given questions so that you can prepare, because with 1 minute, I would have loved to have concise answers. But then they're also canned, right? But again, senators, politicians in general, don't have to make snap decisions.
Right.
So long form, that's where I think this is great. And that's why I'm working with Steven and other candidates across Wisconsin. You were talking about some stuff that's coming up for you, which is really exciting. I just had an interview yesterday with the Capital Times up in Madison, talking TikTok.
Nice.
Because this is a terrific format to be able to do. And normally it's here, right? Where you're reading people's comments. And what I've said is that I think it's a really cool way to learn as a politician.
Yes.
Because you've said you've done small groups. I was with you on some.
Yes.
Right? Which was
gun
cool,
violence.
Right?
Town
Gun
hall,
violence, which was a terrific town hall. But if you're in a little bit larger group, people don't ask questions, people don't respond, there's very little give and take.
Sure.
Or you're one-on-one.
Right.
Which is awesome, but also doesn't give you the big group perspective. What I love doing TikTok videos and TikTok Live is I might be in for an hour and have 50 comments or 100 comments.
Yeah.
Well, that's more experience than you'll get in a dozen debates.
Yeah.
Right? So it's an interesting reality, but that's
right.
For that long form. This is where, I'd love to get into some of the questions that they asked in the debate that you didn't maybe give the full answer that you wanted to give, or that were surprised. The China question. That one made me laugh.
Yeah.
So what did you what did you like? What did you hit well? Let's ask that.
Well, I liked that they had asked questions that are clearly on the minds of a lot of Wisconsin voters. Everything from, inflation to Roe v. Wade. Right. So that was great. We also anticipated that they might ask some more niche or unusual questions, and I think we got a couple of those too. And I do enjoy the opportunity to see who can think on their feet. And one thing that was interesting is my whole premise of running is to change the system. Having worked in the halls of Congress, having worked to pass now 35 bipartisan bills of legislation, I saw how you can defy the odds, but also I saw the incentives that cause most members of Congress not to do their jobs, not to serve the American people.
Right.
And so I truly believe any strong candidate for U.S. Senate or Congress needs to be also addressing the systemic issues. So when they talked about whether it's Roe v. Wade, they asked a question about trans rights. They asked about climate change, inflation, higher education and student debt forgiveness. My goal was to highlight specifically what type of bills I would support, but also tie it back to the core system level breakdowns that are going on right now. So one example is Roe v. Wade, where I highlighted I absolutely support codifying Roe v. Wade.
Sure.
But just saying codify Roe v. Wade without saying what you're going to do differently, to me is not enough. And so I highlighted that, first of all, I obviously shared some stories of, people in my life who've had this horrific decision of having an abortion, and these are undeniable life experiences. But on top of that, I highlighted that within minutes of Roe being overturned, you started getting fundraising emails and text messages, including from most of the other candidates on that stage. And my point was the political industrial complex cares a lot more about your dollars than your human rights. And that's the problem that we've got to change.
Well, I think, so when I decided to run for office, I went back to college.
Yeah.
And I've talked about that a lot. I got a degree in economics, and I talk a lot of economics, but I also got a degree in political science. And I studied a lot of political data and political data analysis, political philosophy and psychology. Political psychology is one of my favorite classes. But money in politics is such an interesting topic right now. I mean, your race, my former race, is a great example.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you've raised and put into it. I wasn't doing fundraising. I was talking with people. Right?
Yeah.
Rather than 6 hours a day of call time.
Right.
Alex Lasry has put in $12 million into the primary. I can't emphasize this enough. Right? Sarah Godlewski has put in close to $3 million. Mandela Barnes raised $6 million. Tom Nelson is somewhere in the couple million range, I think, for donations. And the 2018 gubernatorial race, where Governor Evers got elected, that primary, there were a bunch of Democratic candidates.
Oh, yeah.
The top three candidates spent $1 million each.
Yeah.
And the whole race was like $4 million.
Right.
This primary is generating $20 to $30 million, let alone we're probably going to be at least $100 million aside in the general.
That's right.
And it's flabbergasting because it means it's incredibly difficult to compete.
That's right.
And so much of what Steven's he and I have talked a lot over the months of the campaign. We've gotten together, which has been fun. And my campaign was driven around this sort of thing, direct engagement. Yours is very much around changing the political system.
That's right.
Right. The rest of the candidates, respectfully, are kind of standard Democrats.
Yeah.
Which is we'll vote for them at the end of the day. At least I will. I won't speak for Steven. But $12 million.
Yeah.
And we've got the last 3 weeks that are the biggest 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. How do we combat that? How do you get the money out of it?
Yeah. Well, and also to your point about, generic Democrats is when you have a generic Democrat in a year like 2022, it doesn't work, just to be honest. I mean, we got to be honest about, the election cycle. Generic Democrat probably does well in 2018, right? And can get independent voters as well. Not in 2022. Right. And so we have to do better. We have to do better than standard generic establishment Democrat, which frankly our state has gotten too used to over the last 10 years. I think that one of the most, first of all, the experience post-debate has been incredible.
Awesome.
This is our lightning in a bottle moment for sure. And hearing from so many people across the state. And one of the most touching things is how many people say, you're the first person I've been excited to vote for in a long time, maybe the last 10 years. And I remember the last time I was truly excited to vote for someone was Russ Feingold in 2010.
Right.
And when I share that with people, they say, yeah, me too. And so I'm thinking about this through the voter lens. It's like, yeah, you can support a generic Democrat. Most of them have lost, frankly, over the last 10 years.
Yep.
But the excitement here to vote for something that you feel, that's something that's special. And so we've been just absorbing this incredible momentum and then trying to, take advantage. Now, to your point about money in politics, one symptom of the system right now, as you mentioned 2 examples with Lazary and Godlewski, is a candidate's stock often becomes artificially inflated.
Right.
Because of the money and the way that the establishment media colludes in that system, because where's all that money going to? Well, a major destination of that money are the media companies. And the media companies use the only really one criteria to stack up the race, and that's money.
Right.
And so what happens if you got these candidates who are inflated in their stock, probably higher than they should be, and then you have a debate? The great equalizer. And I think that it brought certain people back down to the ground. And so, but how do we get money out of politics? I think, first of all, what the loophole that we're seeing at play is that while normal candidates can raise money with a maximum contribution of $2,900 for the primary election,
in this race,
for a federal race, a self-funder can put an unlimited degree of money.
Right.
And so that's why we need to put caps in place. One law that I strongly support, that Millennial Action Project, my organization of young elected legislators, helped to pass and defend in Connecticut, is a citizens elections program, which includes a number of things, but including caps on self-funders.
Cool.
And so that's a program I want to build on and expand to the federal level. And what that also includes is a system of crowdfunding for your campaign, and when you reach a threshold, you get a matching grant, a competitive grant from the government, so you can run a real campaign. So that, to me, is a much better system than what we have right now, where you've got people, the dynamic that you described quite well.
Right. And I self-funded, not nearly in the
millions,
right? I put in
millions.
150,000, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And I had said, I could be outspent 5 to 1. And be viable, have a fair chance, right? We've seen that. Governor Evers, for example, when he ran and won, he was outspent about 3.5 to 1 by Scott Walker, who was the incumbent, right? So money doesn't always win.
No,
right?
That's right.
But you have to at least be kind of in the game. Being outspent 80 to 1 is pretty outrageous. Somebody had said, how about publicly funding all the elections? And that's along the lines of what Steven was talking about. And I think that's an interesting point of distinction. It was a practical example. It's something that was done. You did it in Connecticut.
Right.
That's effective, functional, that can be repeated.
That's right.
Right. And it's really easy, and I fell into this too, and it can be hard to say this is the exact policy, right?
Right.
And that comes from a myriad of reasons. Is A, we have to deal with everybody else. Right. Whoever gets elected is not king of the world.
That's right. That's right.
Right? There's 99 other senators, 435 House members, a president, and then 9 random members of the Supreme Court that do whatever the hell they want to do.
That's right.
So I think it's a really cool example of an actual practical, this worked, this is what we can do. By the way, somebody said I watched the debate and you're a great Steven.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
But there are other questions. So one of the others was stop talking about getting votes and talk about how you would fix the rampant bigotry.
Yeah.
And there's not a good answer, I don't think, for fixing it. But
right.
One of the things it was the person that came up with that said 157, so this just happened today, 157 Republicans voted against, they said interracial marriage. I'm assuming that it was actually LGBT.
Right.
Unless they're actually going back to Loving v. Virginia. Right. But today,
the Respect
the House,
for Marriage Act,
right.
I think, yes. Well, yeah, a couple things on that. One is I'm proud that all the Republicans who are part of Millennial Action Project's Future Caucus on the Hill, which is young members of Congress, all the members that we work with, they all voted for
that's cool.
the Respect for Marriage Act. And so that is a great example of how we've been able to build a consensus and build coalitions, and why the art of talking with people
right.
across the aisle and listening and understanding leads to real change. That is real change, that just to see those Republican votes in favor of LGBT rights around marriage. Now, in terms of bigotry, I think you're exactly right, Adam. One thing we can do, and this came up during the debate, is make it less profitable for politicians to traffic in bigotry.
Sure. And
for media companies, frankly, to profit as well. And that's why we had a question about trans rights and some of the discrimination happening there. And what I pointed to is really the root problem, which is that it's very easy for politicians to gin up dollars and votes by stoking fear.
Right.
And by profiting on bigotry, because fear has always been an effective political tactic. I think it's immoral too, but and so people use that for discriminatory purposes. But one reason why you see, one of the most interesting things I saw in Congress was you not only have bad people who do bad things and good people who do good things, but you have good people who do bad things. And one reason why I've seen a lot of good people do bad things, including trafficking in bigotry, is that they would not have otherwise done, is because they are on this constant fundraising treadmill.
Right.
And for them, it's self-preservation. Now, that's not my goal in public service. I'm going in to make an impact, and I've said very publicly, including at the debate, I'm prepared to lose my job in the Senate to do what's right. But if you're constantly thinking what's the most convenient way to raise money constantly, not only for your re-election, but also for committee assignments and for influence, well then, one easy way is to discriminate against immigrants, to discriminate against Black people, against Asians, against trans people, against the LGBT plus community. And that's where I think if we change the incentives, we'll see fewer people trafficking in that kind of fear and hate-based politics.
Well, and it's when you study persuasion, fear and anger are the two most powerful emotions to create in someone in order to motivate action.
Right.
And generally speaking, Democrats don't trade in fear and anger.
Right.
the GOP absolutely does,
Yeah, sure.
right? And I'm critical of it and call it out all the time. It's like you said, it's fear of the LGBT community. It's rapists and murderers coming over the border, and I want to say this for people that are watching, because I teach this. Is how do we as liberals, right? How do we have a conversation with somebody on the other side, right? It's Thanksgiving and Uncle Bob is throwing whatever terrible things at you that he's thrown at you.
Right.
And sometimes it's data, sometimes it's information, sometimes it's questions. But just turning and looking and going, no, you're wrong, no, you're an idiot, right? Or whipping mashed potatoes across the table,
Right.
doesn't do it. And so, like the murders and rapists coming across the border. So there was the young girl in the 10-year-old in Ohio that was raped, got pregnant, couldn't get the abortion because Roe v. Wade was overturned. She was 6 weeks and 3 days. It was past the 6 weeks. She went to Indiana. Then there was all the hoopla because initially there was no verification. It was the one report.
Right.
And then Republicans, Fox News, came out and said, oh, this is all just a hoax, which of course it wasn't. It was a minor, so we're not reporting on it. It's not available. It was being investigated. We don't comment on any of that stuff. And then, of course, they arrested the guy. And of course, the news from the GOP is the guy that they arrested is an illegal alien.
Right.
And that's somehow the news.
That's right.
And it's tragic because A, it doesn't matter, right?
Right.
But when we look at the data, and if you just think about things logically, right? And it takes some encouragement to do this, but we know from the data is that people that come to the country, illegally, whatever that means, or whatever term you want to use. And I realize that some people don't like the term illegal alien,
Right.
and undocumented. I'm not going to worry about that. But we know that they commit crimes at a significantly lower level
That's right.
than both legal immigrants as well as American citizens.
That's right.
Because they don't want to get caught and deported.
Yeah. It's very logical.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's fear and anger.
That's right.
And you're absolutely right. That creates motivation and that creates money.
Yeah, yeah. And regardless of the scale of the problem, for example, with the issue around trans women athletes,
Oh my God.
the data is how small of a fraction this is of women's sports at the college level. And yet,
At any level.
At any level, exactly. And yet it's occupying major amounts of time on the airwaves of sitting U.S. senators. Of course, there are plenty of Republicans who are going wild, spending all their time on this issue. And time is a finite resource. And I do talk a lot about how time is used in Congress. But if you're spending all your time on social media and going on cable news talking about trans athletes, you're not focused on the main responsibilities in the U.S. Senate. Meanwhile, you're, again, blowing it completely out of proportion. You would think that 50% of, college athletes are trans, which
Right.
is, of course, not the case.
Right, right. And I think, we as Democrats, it's hard. CRT was another example.
Exactly.
Right. And the governor in Virginia, Youngkin, won running as an anti-CRT. That was his entire platform.
Right. And I think if you consider Glenn Youngkin as a human being
Youngkin,
and his
Yeah.
and his background, does anyone really think that Youngkin cares that much about CRT, or that this was his mission going into politics? I'm going to fight against CRT. Of course not. I mean, he was a private equity executive at the Carlyle Group. He does not,
Right.
That's not his core issue. I don't know him, but I guarantee you that's not his core issue. But he made it his core issue.
Absolutely.
Because of not only the money in politics, but also the issue of the primary system. He knew that he's not appealing to the general election. He wasn't trying to appeal to all Virginians in the primary election.
Right.
He was trying to get the narrow base of Republican primary voters to like him. And that's where he knew that he could traffic in CRT, raise a lot of money, scare up votes through that. And then he did try to broaden his message a little bit in the general election, but that's why we need nonpartisan, open primaries.
And I'm a huge fan of that. So Alaska's got it this year.
Yes.
For the first time. So they've got nonpartisan primaries, and they've got ranked balloting.
Yes, for the general. Yeah.
Right, which is really, really cool. And I think Maine does it
For congressional.
some, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I think that would be awesome to see for voters. It would suck for partisan politicians.
Yes, exactly. And exactly.
So we'd love it.
Yes. People who want to work together and solve problems, and talk like a normal person, it's fantastic. And I just saw an image of what the Alaska ballot looks like. It's wonderful. I mean, you've got all the primary candidates on one ballot.
Right.
Doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Republican, or some other party, all on one ballot. And then you move on 5 candidates to the general election.
Okay.
And so that's why, if not for that, you're just thinking, how can I be the most extreme,
Right.
hence CRT as an example,
Absolutely.
to win the primary. Instead, you're thinking, I'll give an example in our race. We have a lot of disaffected, of course we're firing up Democrats, but we have independents, we have disaffected Republicans, we have 2-time Ron Johnson voters now supporting our campaign. And I believe if we have nonpartisan open primaries, we'd have even more of them voting.
Absolutely.
But in Wisconsin, you have to choose one party or the other to vote for in the primary. Now, why ranked choice voting in the general election is a great idea is because you can say your second, third, fourth choice, really decide who you're going to vote for,
Right.
as opposed to who you're voting against, which is often the case. And Lisa Murkowski in the U.S. Senate is a perfect example of this.
Yep.
She was one of the few Republicans to convict Donald Trump, and her approval rating went down to about 6%
Yep.
in the Republican Party in Alaska. And yet, she's going to move on
Yep.
from the primary to the general election because she'll be in the top 5. And she's appealing to the general electorate as opposed to the primary electorate, and she's got a great chance of probably winning for re-election.
Yeah. Well, and I think it goes to both of the types of campaigns that you and I both ran.
Yeah.
And we could, for me, I could say this was perhaps a strategic mistake, where I ran similar to how I ran in 2020, but I didn't have a primary in 2020 when I ran for state senate.
Right.
So I was talking with conservatives and liberals and progressives, and the very first person I had in my house for a face-to-face talking politics was a raging libertarian.
Nice.
Right? But that doesn't work in partisan primaries.
Right.
And so despite the fact that I was still talking with a wide variety of people, I can't tell you how many, and you've probably had this too, where you'll have a conservative say, you're the first Democrat I've been willing to vote for.
Yeah.
Right? Or something along those lines. But to your point, unless they're willing to flip over and vote on the Democratic side of the primary, right? If they really want to support somebody on the Republican primary for the gubernatorial race, which is a whole nother reality.
Yeah.
They can't. And so, yeah, it's. I would love to see it open up. I think it would make politics, it would make it democratic.
It would make it more democratic, exactly. Now, to your point, one thing that did work in our favor in this situation is the Republican gubernatorial candidates are not much to speak of. So we're fortunately able to get people who actually will commit to voting for us on the Democratic side.
Right, and somebody said Andrew Yang is all for this, and Andrew Yang also supporting.
Absolutely. Steven. The Yang gang, nationally as well as here in Wisconsin, has been incredible. A very passionate group of people who really want to see our politics open up and want to look at things in a new way. And it's not only these types of democratic reforms, it's also things like broadening how we look at economic success. It's not just GDP, it's things that make our life fulfilling, dignity, and finding meaningful work. It's even smart regulations on technology and social media. So term limits on members of Congress. I'm the only candidate in this race, Democrat or Republican, who's supportive of term limits.
Hey, now, okay, I'm not in the race
You're
anymore.
not in the race anymore.
I did sign. Okay, 2 things.
Yeah.
First of all, or 3 things, lots of things. We could go on forever. But so you mentioned the GOP gubernatorial race, and I did too. Yeah. So their debate is this Sunday.
Yes.
It's going to be the same format as that Steven was just in.
Yeah.
There's only 3 of them. I did in the Senate debate. I did a live analysis.
Nice.
Along the way. It took 3 hours for their hour-long event.
That's amazing.
And I talked strategy about what I talked strategy beforehand. You know, who was going to do what, and for the most part, I was pretty close. But then I talked about issues right where I could spend more than a minute. Unfortunately, these guys couldn't. And I'm going to do that actually with the GOP gubernatorial race this weekend as well. So we'll do that on TikTok Live and Facebook Live, because I think it's important that even though most people that follow me are Democrats or liberal, not everybody is.
Right.
I have plenty of conservatives that follow me,
Yeah.
and I think it's worth talking with them about their candidates and trying to be as analytical as possible. Right. I certainly, as we've said, they're an interesting bunch. But we'll see if we can break it down. What I think will be really interesting is how often they call each other out.
Yeah.
Because that didn't happen for you guys other than that one time.
Yeah. By name. You know,
by name.
I did highlight, for example, that leadership on climate change is not sitting on a task force which produces a report that doesn't go anywhere.
Right.
Of course, that was directly aimed at Lieutenant Governor Barnes,
right.
who uses that as his main experience. And the moderators then asked the next question. So, Lieutenant Governor Barnes, tell us about the task force. And then he tried to pump it up as much as he could, but that's not leadership if it's not going anywhere. I highlighted bipartisan legislation on clean energy that we're able to pass. I also think that in terms of the style at the debate, one mentality I had, not just making sure we highlight those contrasts, not only delivering our message on system change, I think another thing was just having fun. You know, I think that, voters can tell when you're having fun and you're running a joyful campaign. And, people said the similar thing about Andrew Yang. He seemed like the only guy who was happy to be on stage. And I think people said the same thing about me. And I think the best clip that really captures this was the TikTok that we had. Yep. And you did a fabulous duet of it, which I loved so much. But that's what it's all about, have some fun.
Well, and I said while I was running, I think and it's to your point, I think I was one of the few candidates, like yourself, I think Cooley is another one.
Sure, yeah.
Who's really having fun.
Yeah.
Engaging with people, learning from people. I had some of the coolest experiences. Is maybe I'm 50, so I can say cool. In like the 53206 zip code, which is the inner city of Milwaukee, the most impoverished area of Milwaukee, and I'm sitting on a porch with half a dozen people that I guarantee you I would have never met otherwise.
Yeah.
And and I said, so, and you get this, we all get this, somebody will look at you and say, well, what do you stand for? What do you believe in? Or what's your policy or whatever?
Yeah.
And a lot of candidates have a standard, right, rhetoric that the litany that they'll drop off.
Right. And
my response was often, well, what's important to you?
Yeah.
And so many people would respond, well, you're the candidate, you tell me.
Right.
Well, and I said, I could talk about universal health care and being a small business owner, but if you're not a small business owner, that's not going to resonate, right? That's not going to connect. So I said, so I want to know what's important, and then let's talk about it. And so I'm sitting here on 13th and Valit, and a guy looks at me and says, nobody needs an AR-15.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now we can have a conversation.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Or another one was, it was all about education. Somebody else was like, listen, I'm thrilled that the Deer District, for the Bucks and stuff, and this isn't associated with Alex Lazary. I love it, and I'm happy for the Bucks and stuff, and all the money and the renovation that's happened. And he's like, we're 2 miles away, and our roads are destroyed, and the buildings are dilapidated. How do we get some of that to come this way?
Sure.
Right? And again, I've lived in Milwaukee most of my life. The book Evicted, if you haven't read it, look at it. It's talk about evictions in the city of Milwaukee. And it's not just, central city problems, a lot of it, but it's also, 6th and College and the trailer parks, and which I've driven past all my life and I had no idea about. And so there were so many things like that were incredible learning experiences, incredible interactions with people, of really what's important for them, and so I had fun.
Yeah.
with the campaign. And I think you're right. A lot of campaigns don't. A lot of candidates don't.
Yeah. And one very clear sign of this was, look at what happens right when the debate ends. A few people commented.
Did they all leave?
This.
I wasn't there.
Yeah. So I'm not. Maybe some of it might have gotten picked up, but most of it probably didn't. So here's what really happened.
Cool. Behind the scenes.
Yeah. So we're shaking each other's hands on stage, and my natural instinct is to go straight to people. So I'm going to the edge of the stage and shaking hands. All the other candidates were walking off stage, and they saw at the corner of their eye, oh, look at Steven, that looks good. Okay, and then they start walking back. And I saw someone who had a video who captures this entire situation where I went straight to the people, they're all walking away and then turning back. And she said, that's what a leader looks like, where they do something that's the right thing, the others were not, and then they're all coming up front. But to me, it wasn't a thought, it wasn't planned or anything. It's just, when you're having fun, you want to engage with people, and that's what politics really should be about, that you enjoy listening to people's stories. You're not doing it for yourself. You actually want to hear from people, engage with people, and ultimately help people at the end of the day.
I think it's really interesting when Jillian Bettino was running. She and I were often the last two to leave an event.
Yeah, us too. Yeah, absolutely.
And Steven and I have that has been the case for us as well. And Jillian and I wound up talking with each other. Steven and I have oftentimes, half an hour after events, we're still standing around talking. And
do you remember the one in West Dallas?
Yeah, absolutely. It was like an hour. And Steven's looking at me like, "Can I go now?" No. But that was such a cool experience. It's part of the reason I like Dr. Bettino so much is. And it wasn't just that I was talking with people or she was talking with people, but we would engage together with people as well.
Right.
Where I can talk about universal health care as a small business owner and how beneficial I think it would be for businesses and employers and employees. She's a radiologist. She's opened clinics in Nicaragua and Central America and some of the most impoverished areas. And she comes at it from a medical perspective, which is vastly different. It's the same solution, it's the same answer, but how she presents it is going to connect with some people. How I present it is going to connect with other people. And I think that's one of the big challenges about messaging is we can have multiple messages that all lead to the same solution.
Right.
Politicians don't like that though, right? We don't like, not us, but politicians in general, don't like having to know multiple different angles and multiple different things.
Yeah.
It's nice and easy to present the same speech, the same comments, the same explanation 100 times over.
That's right.
Because you get good at it, it's easy, it's repeatable, and then you leave.
Yeah.
Having conversations requires knowing.
Yeah, that's right. And I think one reason why a lot of people say, like, your messaging sounds so fresh, and I say, we took the radical step of hearing from people. I got the fresh framing of these ideas, really talking with all of you. I'll give a concrete example of how this works out. So if you take an issue like criminal justice reform, one reason we're able to get Democrats and Republicans on board is for different reasons. And to me, sometimes the word bipartisanship, I think, gets misinterpreted, and there are certainly bad examples of bipartisanship out there as well.
Sure.
But the metaphor I would use, it's not about meeting at the 50-yard line, because not all the best solutions are there. Yeah. The example I'd point to is Dr. King in the civil rights movement. He was seen as a radical extremist, and in fact, he was very upset with the moderates who were telling him to go more slowly. So it's not the 50-yard line. It's about meeting on a new playing field altogether, taking into account different ideas. And so if you take criminal justice reform, there is a consensus left-right on reducing the prison population, especially for nonviolent offenders, helping people to really get a second chance after they leave the incarceration system for a couple reasons. If you are a conservative, it's because this is big government at its worst. It's one of the biggest public expenditures, not a good use of public resources. So for fiscal responsibility reasons, a lot of conservatives support it. You also have evangelical Christians and people for religious reasons believe in redemption,
right,
who also support these types of reforms. Now, on the progressive side, you've got people who strongly believe in a more just system, who are concerned that the system is discriminating against black and brown people. And so at the end of the day, you have people coming to the same solution for different reasons. And that's why the First Step Act was able to pass through Congress with everyone from Van Jones and Newt Gingrich, working together on that.
Right. And one of the questions that had come up when we first started this, right, was somebody said, why don't candidates talk at length?
Yeah.
Well, because that just took a minute, 2 minutes, whatever, and barely touches on things, because I go to add into that, right? So when I ran in 2020, former Governor Thompson, former Health and Human Services Secretary, was running the UW system. He was president of the UW school system.
Right, right.
And he had sent out to all of the candidates, or his office did, it might have been signed by Tommy, kind of his plan, his goals.
Nice.
And so one of the things that was funny is his budget proposal for the UW system was bigger than what Governor Evers was proposing.
Wow, wow.
And he's a former Republican,
yeah.
Right? And then one of the things that was in it, and this gets to Steven's point about criminal justice, is he proposed putting a UW branch, and we haven't had a new UW branch since 1971 or 1969, right?
Yeah.
So we haven't expanded in a long time. He proposed putting a new UW branch in the prisons.
I love it, yeah.
And here's the math, and this came from an economics professor. Is in Wisconsin, we spend $39,000 a year to keep somebody in jail. 40 grand.
Yeah.
Every year. We don't get anything for it with the exception of license plates, I suppose. We don't want slave labor, by the way. And the recidivism rate, if you're not educated, and in this case, I think it was a 4-year degree, but which is why the university was involved. So for those that don't have a 4-year degree, the recidivism rate, which is you get out of jail and then you go back, because I shouldn't use $5 words, I'm sorry, is 50%.
Yeah.
Half of the people that get out of jail, out of prison, that don't have a 4-year education, half of them wind up back in jail. Right. And again, $40,000 a year we're spending. The recidivism rate, if you have a degree, 5%.
Yeah.
It drops it by 90%. So that investment, which might be, say, $10,000 a year, because we don't have to create massive, campuses and stuff, right? So we're not putting quite as much money in, but still significant, 10 grand, something along those lines, would be a massive economic payoff. Mm-hmm. Plus, those people, when they get out, then they've got a degree, which gives them greater opportunity to participate in society, to earn a living, and everything else that goes along with it. And of course, the Wisconsin GOP shot it down.
Yeah.
But it's a different argument.
Yeah.
Is to present it from an economic standpoint, from a business standpoint, and the challenge is to get over the it's not fair.
Yeah.
Right? Why should we spend money on people in prison? Well, we should spend money on people in prison to educate them because it's cheaper for us.
That's right.
At the end of the day.
That's right.
And it's better for them and it's better for society.
Yeah. And I just think, and the way you're talking about this, Adam, this is I believe, the core responsibility of a U.S. Senator.
Right.
Why be a legislator in Congress if you don't want to have these types of conversations? You only want to hang in your own bubble and hang in your own corner, not listening and learning to how other people are approaching issues. The only result of that is you don't get anything done. And if you don't want to get anything done, why run for office in the first place? Unless the motivation was just to get the position title. Now, if you do want to make a difference in Congress, you need to have those conversations. And this ties back to the enjoyment piece, because I enjoy talking with people who are different than me. I feel like I learned something new. And in fact, bringing together unlikely bedfellows on issues from criminal justice reform to voting rights, which I've done, for clean energy. I've gotten Republicans to support a price on carbon emissions. Name your issue.
Right.
It's fun.
Yeah.
And that's what our democracy requires. So I just encourage everyone, when you're thinking about candidates to vote for any kind of legislative position, just ask them, do they enjoy talking with people who are different than them? That's a passion of mine, and with the Millennial Action Project, have legislation to show for it too.
Right, and that's just it. It's There's and it's a logic fallacy, and I forget the name of it, but it's A or B,
Right.
right? And that's kind of what politics has become.
Binary.
And no, there's so many more options and different ways of thinking about things. And like Steven said, it's not just meeting at the 50 and blending A and B. It's, oh, maybe there's X. Right?
Exactly.
Let's take a look at something else completely. And somebody said, well, how about the treatment of inmates, or how the treatment of inmates perpetuates the revolving door? And that's a whole nother component,
Yeah.
right, of how policing and enforcement, and then inside the prison systems itself, absolutely. Which gets back to having really long conversations.
Yeah.
I talked about it a lot as dominoes. It's this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this.
That's right.
None of these variables are independent of each other.
Yeah. A good example of getting to X on gun violence happened at our town hall that we did together.
Which was super cool.
Yeah, thank you. And this question also came up during the debate in terms of gun violence. And so at our town hall, we explicitly brought together people across the political spectrum to have what we called a higher ground town hall on gun violence prevention after the horrific shootings that we saw. And I'll never forget, first of all, thank you for being there.
I was the data guy.
A few people started calling you data guy.
That's fine. I'm cool with that. I'm a nerd.
That was so good. And just, our conversation was infinitely better because you were there. So thank you for taking the time. Now, there was a guy across the room. Oh, first of all, the format was really cool too, because I've always wanted to see these town halls with elected officials where you're sitting on the same level and having an open conversation versus a lot of what I've seen, which is separation and distance, where often the candidate or the elected official is up on a dais or something like that. So this was very kind of flat.
In a circle.
In a circle.
You have to look at each other.
Yeah, it was a literal circle. And there's someone across the way from you, Adam, who is a two-time Ron Johnson voter, gun rights guy, who described the experience of going into a gun store recently to purchase a firearm. And he's walking out and he goes, "Is that it? Is there anything else that you can provide for me?" Right. He was looking for more in the way of training. He couldn't believe that it was just so easy. And so here's a gun rights Republican, two-time Ron Johnson voter who is saying he wants more training. Right. And that's why one of our proposals is a system of gun licensing that includes a system similar to getting a driver's license, where you go through driver's ed, you pass a test, you get a license, same thing for guns. That's an example, I think, of getting to X as opposed to just A versus B.
Right. And he was a really interesting individual to talk to. He had moved from suburban Milwaukee areas to the east side after he'd retired or close to retirement, and he didn't feel safe.
Right.
And so he bought a gun. And I was talking with him afterwards. I spent probably another 10, 15 minutes with him afterwards because, again, I was the data guy.
Yeah.
And the data is that you're far more likely to be injured by that weapon than you are to protect yourself. Okay. It doesn't make you any safer. And of course, crime is actually not nearly as rampant as it appears. It's one of the big things when we go back to the topic of fear and anger, that the GOP is hammering, right? Crime, crime, crime. And have murder rates gone up? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Part of that's because of COVID, and that's an interesting thing to look at. And suicide rates have gone up, and drug deaths have gone up. Deaths from alcohol have gone up over the last couple of years. So there's a lot going on, and a lot of that is associated with the anxiety from COVID. But the data is very clear. But he looked at me, and I relayed another story, and it was when the city of Milwaukee was, or actually it was the state of Wisconsin, so under Scott Walker, the state of Wisconsin said, you don't have to be a city resident anymore to live to work in cities. Right? So Milwaukee police and Milwaukee firefighter and stuff like that, you don't have to live inside the city border. And the city had fought that, and they lost. And the news articles were, Milwaukee's going to lose all these people, and the list goes on. So I was talking with a woman about this, and she said, when I bought my house, my realtor told me that there were a couple of firefighters that lived in the neighborhood, and I feel safer because of that. And I said, well, they're not going to run over to your house if there's a fire. Your insurance company cares about how close the nearest fire hydrant is and how close the nearest fire department is.
Right.
Not how close the nearest firefighter is.
Right.
And she looked at me and said, well, I still feel safer. And that's the emotional component of this, and that's the emotional component of guns. I was listening to AM 620 accidentally last night on the radio because it had been a Brewers game, and then it was still on the radio. And it was in the evening, and I don't know who the DJ was because I don't listen much, but he was talking about the Indiana Mall shooting, the three people that were killed, and that it was somebody in the mall, a citizen, who had their gun that killed the shooter.
Yeah.
And he was talking about the fact that makes him believe that that would be a good thing, right? The good guy with a gun. He's like, I don't know how to, he was disturbed by, but that was his emotional response.
Right.
And it's understandable, but again, it just doesn't jive with the data.
Right.
What we know is that owning a weapon like that and carrying it, you're more likely to be injured, right? You're more likely to have it taken from you and used against you.
That's right.
And it was an incredibly brave and unusual situation where somebody actually stopped the shooter, didn't kill anybody else, didn't shoot anybody else, right? He was accurate and wasn't then shot by anybody else, including the police.
Right, right.
Because that's the rest of the problem that shows up is, great, you just shot somebody, the person over there doesn't know that you're the good guy with the gun.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
But it was really interesting going back to that roundtable with that gentleman of it's the emotional response. It's I feel safer,
right?
And you're actually not. Here's the data.
Yeah, that's powerful. What kind of stuff? I was going to ask about the questions. What are we hearing here?
Then why are so somebody said, and these are the questions that are always funny. Why then are politicians escorted by armed guards?
Yeah. Well, I think certainly. I mean, look. First of all, I think that it is a sad reality that they do need to be escorted by armed guards. We have real political violence. I mean, the truth is, if you take honestly. A lot of members of Congress right now, unfortunately, do have threats to their lives.
Sure.
And if you take a controversial or unpopular position, you're going to have even more threats, like real death threats. And now with the January 6th Commission, a lot of this has come out. Adam Kinzinger is an example of someone who actually shared publicly some of the threats he's been getting. So unfortunately, a lot more people need this kind of security. And I think it's a broader issue of where our political discourse has gotten, but at the same time, I think that we need elected leaders who do vote on principle,
right.
And we can't let first of all, we need people who can end the norm of this kind of rising political violence, but we also can't let that threat make members of Congress scared from doing the right thing.
Right. And here's the logical fallacy of that argument of why do people need armed guards?
Yeah.
And we're talking in comparison to the good guy with the gun, right?
Right.
So here's 2 points that quite frankly, and I won't be subtle, destroy your comment. I can be not subtle. He has to still be kind of subtle. I don't. But it's an interesting logical argument, and I understand it. It's a false equivalency, and here's why. And I'm going to use my dad voice. So first of all, armed guards are not a good guy with a gun. Armed guards are trained professionals.
That's right.
In the same way that military is, if not more so, in the same way that police are, if not, again, more so. So they're very specifically trained to watch for threats, to be aware of threats, to be able to neutralize threats, and ideally do that without injuring the population. The good guy with the gun, that is not their training, which goes to the point of the gentleman that was in the event who said, I went in and I bought a 357 and they let me walk out with a gun and a bunch of bullets and that's it. No training, no nothing, right? Okay, so that's part of it. Here's the second argument, and I'm going to use data, and here's a really quick way that you know that good guys with the guns don't stop this sort of crime. Stephen, how many guns are there in the United States? Any idea?
Something like 300 million?
400 million.
400 million?
Right. Yeah. There are 330 million people. There are 400 million guns. There's more than one gun per every man, woman, and child in this country. And yet we have the highest per capita rates of gun deaths. We have more guns per capita than any other country in the world, and we have more deaths, more murders per capita than any other country civilized, not civilized, industrialized, right? Of course, third world countries and stuff like that's a different animal, but of industrialized, developed, first world countries, we have more guns per capita and we have more gun deaths per capita. If the argument of the good guy with guns protects you, then nobody would be shot in the United States of America.
Right.
Because we have 400 million guns.
Yeah. And also just think about it logically. Do you feel like your elementary school teacher is prepared to be using a gun? Maybe there's some cases where, certainly, I mean, maybe if they've actually gone through training and they have a lot of experience, maybe, but not most of them. I was talking to a friend from Senegal who was telling me they don't have this kind of guns problem. It's very rare for people to have a gun, and for those who do, like my friend went through a 3-month training course to have the certification required to have a firearm.
Right. And so somebody said, so do you support banning all citizen guns or just heavy regulation and limitation?
Yeah, regulation and limitation, absolutely.
Yeah, we're not, I mean, I can discuss the Second Amendment. I've actually gone through constitutional law classes. The chair of the political science department is a friend of mine at UWM, and we talk about this stuff. And we can delve into the whole Second Amendment and why the current argument is absolute horseshit. By the way, here's a fun one.
Yeah.
And again, sometimes I like to just step up and it wasn't until so for those of you that are that have the gun conversation, regardless of which side you're on. When's the first Supreme Court case that really dealt with Second Amendment rights? Ooh. Any ideas? Just time-wise. How long have Supreme Court?
I don't think it's ever come up.
2008.
2008, right.
Right. For the first 240 years, 230 years of the of our country, we understood that, people can hunt. We're cool with that. People can own weapons. We're cool with that. It wasn't until 2008 that was the first significant Supreme Court associated with handguns and whether you could own them and where and all sorts of stuff, and that was in D.C.
Huh.
It's only been in the last 14 years. And most of that has come up because of the National Rifle Association, the NRA.
Right.
It became a political organization over 40 years and hundreds of millions of dollars spent based on the gun manufacturers and the gun lobby. It doesn't have anything to do with individuals, but that's a whole other story.
That's right.
And I don't know how long you have. We've been on for almost an hour.
Oh, nice.
This can go forever, but goes back to one of the things I said at the beginning of this, and I talk about with all the candidates that I'm trying to get to come here on TikTok. Is TikTok lives are awesome. We've got 3,800 likes over the last hour, right?
Wow, outstanding.
Which is so cool, and I'll look at the data later on to see how many people have come through and spent some time. But the question at the beginning was, why don't politicians spend time?
Yeah.
Right? We can't do it in the debates. It's a minute. Why don't politicians spend time? This is spending time, and so what I've encouraged, and I know Steven's TikTok is somewhere around 500. We'd like to get him up to 1,000, because once you're at 1,000 on TikTok, then you can do TikTok lives.
That would be great.
And these can be done in the car, right? These are at the end after a rally, right? I would have loved to have seen one. Honestly, I would have done one at the end of the debate.
Yeah,
if I had been a candidate, I would have absolutely done one at the end of the debate.
Yeah.
To say, here's what just happened. Here's the experience. And so that's what I'm trying to do with some assembly candidates around the state, is to get them involved to the point where they can do lives, because then they can actually spend time like this, which is really hard to do as a candidate normally, where you've got to go somewhere and you've got to get people to be there, and then they've got to be asking questions and all the coordination and stuff like that. The cool thing about being able to do this, and I think TikTok's a great medium for it, but you can do it with Facebook Live and stuff as well, is it's easy, it's accessible, people can delve in, they can ask their questions, and then you can really give lengthy answers.
Yeah. Well, I think being a live candidate is something I'm very passionate about, and it's not always the case. You're probably used to seeing politicians who are very closed off. They don't take any unscripted questions.
Right.
They need their consultants, their political consultants, to tell them what to say. I mean, this is very real. I mean, I just have to be very real with the audience. We had a candidate forum on War and Peace and foreign policy organized by Milwaukee Turners this week.
Oh.
The two highest polling candidates didn't show up.
Right.
And the person with the third amount of money, she was only on for 20 minutes, and then she felt like she had to leave. And one of the highest polling candidates said that his team will he'll send responses after the end of the forum. Well, after he's gotten the questions, and then he can respond to them, so in a scripted kind of way. And my problem with that is you're not getting the real person.
Right.
You're getting these rehearsed answers from political consultants. And so many of you wonder, why is it that politicians don't talk like real people? That's why. They're not live with you. And it gets to the core motivation for why one is even running for office in the first place. Are they running to be something, or are they running to do something? Right. If you're running to be something, then you're going to play it safe. You're going to get consultant talking points, because your calculus in your mind is, how do I not screw anything up, because I don't really have any original ideas myself, and I just want the easiest path to get into office. And there's some times where that ends up working, and I think that's unfortunate. But if you want to do something, you're running on ideas because of a set of life experiences and because of a vision that you have, because of a cause larger than yourself, well then you're not thinking in your mind, well, what is my consultant telling me to think? You're saying, this is what is right. Okay. And that to me is the essence of a live candidate. So I'd love to be able to do a lot more of these types of TikTok lives, and we need more followers in order to do that.
Yeah. So there were a couple, somebody said, thanks for sitting down and doing this. And I've been doing this for a while, both with people or TikTok lives, duets or dual ones, or just me. I did one after the Uvalde shooting.
Yeah.
At 11 o'clock at night until 1 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
And we had 3,500 people come through in the course of a couple of hours and share their thoughts, share their concerns, share their experiences. And that's an incredible experience. And I've done them on economics. Somebody asked in here, what's your stance on trickle-down economics?
Yeah. Don't support, but I just think that the notion of, first of all, I think these slogans kind of get out of hand, but yeah, the notion that you're going to cut taxes for people at the top and it'll trickle down, the data doesn't really support that. But I do want to say one more thing about the idea of being a live politician. No, I love it. Is you've heard me talk a lot about music on the campaign trail. For those who don't know, I'm a musician. It's my first passion in life. In 3rd grade, I picked up the guitar. 4th grade, I picked up the drums. And since 5th grade onwards, I've been playing in rock bands and jazz groups. I've had hip hop groups, really every genre you can imagine. I even had a Jewish klezmer band.
Okay, that's hysterical.
Yeah. We, hello, how are you? And, I think I use music as a metaphor for politics, especially live politics like this, because that to me is the art form at its best. Jazz music in particular is a call and response art form, which is really a version of what we're doing right here. You and I are riffing on each other's ideas. This is
we have no notes.
Yeah. This is like a jazz expression right now, what we're doing. And I think that's a metaphor for what great political leadership can look like and what our democracy should be. I usually point to 3 skills of being a great jazz musician. One is listening.
Sure.
This is what I picked up on. You might be familiar with the Conservatory of Music in Milwaukee. That's where I was primarily trained on jazz. The second is improvisation, which I would, in a political sense, talk about being fully present, being fully live.
Sure.
And to be a good creator in that space, you need to bring your full self to the table, and I think that's really important. We're inviting your full life experience, and you're often reinventing ideas. That's like not A or B getting to X. That is a jazz expression as well. Yeah. And then third is the call and response and having real conversations that are authentic and honest. And so I think the real political revolution is getting this jazz spirit into politics.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you talked about how difficult it can be, or you had candidates that I say, well, I'll respond afterwards.
Right.
And I'm perfectly comfortable with responding afterwards as long as I responded at first.
Right.
And I'm perfectly comfortable saying, I don't know.
Right.
Right. That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. Let me get back to you. Let my research team do some work, or let me do some research. And it was funny. So I want to point out one of the moments that happened in the debate.
Oh yeah.
And I've read a bunch of the reviews from the debate from different people.
Yeah.
And this was Mandela Barnes, and he was in one of the reviews. He was credited with this great response, right? So it's one of the quotes of him is that he'll support whatever he can for abortion rights, something along those lines. And the question that had been posed to him was about being able to have abortions or having abortion clinics on federal land and Native American reservations.
Sure.
And that had come out as kind of a possibility, right? Because then it's not state regulated.
Right.
And there's Indian reservations in probably every state, right? And there's certainly federal lands
Sure.
in every state, and so is that a possibility? And the way that the format was is you guys had a minute, and then if you didn't answer, the moderators were really good about being like, no,
Yeah.
you didn't answer this part of the question, and so they hit him with that. And he kind of he bobbed and weaved a little bit, and then he said, I'd support anything we can do to improve women's access for abortions. Again, along those lines.
Right.
And what was interesting for me, and again, now he's been written up, that was his great quote. What was funny for me, and I said this while I was doing the analysis, is I had read about that proposal, and unfortunately we can't do it.
Right.
And in part of the reason that we can't do it, so we can't have abortion clinics on federal land, and part of the reason for that is because of the Hyde Amendment.
Right.
And the Hyde Amendment, for those of you that aren't familiar, is it's a law that kind of gets renewed every few years that basically says the federal government cannot put any money towards abortions. Right? So since Roe v. Wade, the federal government has never given money to Planned Parenthood for abortions. If you were a woman and you went to Planned Parenthood to have an abortion, you had to pay for all of the services and stuff associated with that abortion. So federal money can't go towards it. Consequently, because of the Hyde Amendment, we can't do abortion clinics on federal land.
Yeah. And
And that potentially also falls into tribal land, a little bit different animal there. And of course, tribal lands, quite frankly, are incredibly impoverished. Here in Wisconsin, 50% of them don't have running water. So it's not feasible as well, and they're not always in locations that would also make sense. But Mandela Barnes didn't know about that.
That's right.
Which is cool. I'm not knocking him at all for that.
Sure.
There's a mountain of topics and stuff like that, and it's incredibly difficult for us to know everything about everything and have an opinion and remember it all, let alone in a minute,
Yeah.
right, or in 30 seconds. And so he clearly didn't know about it. And so his response was fine. It was a good save, but it was not a terrific point as far as I was concerned, as somebody watching it who knew what was going on.
Yeah.
Right? I felt it was a failure, or, not a failure, that's extreme, but he didn't know it. And the thing I would have loved for him to say is, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I don't
It's
know.
tough.
Is a
It's-
sign of confidence, I believe.
Right.
Yeah. As opposed to insecurity.
Exactly. And it's I don't know, let me find out.
Yeah. Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Not surprisingly, there are a lot of bullshitters in politics.
Swimming in them.
Yeah. But one thing that makes me hopeful is voters really can see through the bullshit. And I think maybe not always, but I think a lot of I think even if the voters don't have all the information, which they're not required to or even expected to, but I think they can tell when someone's being authentic and honest with them versus whether they're being fake to them. And I think that basic distinction voters are able to pick up on pretty well.
Yeah.
And they can tell when someone is speaking from the heart and they feel it, they really mean what they're saying versus they're just talking.
Right. Okay. I don't know how much more time you have.
Probably can take one or two more questions.
Okay. So there's two in here, and here's the other thing that's so cool about doing TikTok Live, and I'm recording this so that Steven's got questions and stuff that he can go through. So there are two on here, and they're big topics. Mm-hmm. So the first one is, how would you solve decades of rising healthcare costs?
Sure, yeah.
And we can talk about universal healthcare, Medicare for all. There's a variety of different options. But the other one is very specific. And it's interesting because this is a great indication of Wisconsin. Mm. And it's, in my part of western Wisconsin, signs are out that say no manure digesters.
Right.
What's your stance? There's one of those where I might have gone, I don't know.
Sure.
Right? No manure digester. That's kind of a disturbing term in the grand scheme of things, right? I mean, now I know a little bit about it.
Yeah.
I don't know that I necessarily have a stance, and I don't know that you necessarily do either.
Sure.
But and if you do, cool.
Yeah.
But where this is awesome is then for those to become questions that Steven can turn around and do a video on.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
To spend 3 minutes, or actually on TikTok you can do longer, but to say, all right, this was a question that came up, and it doesn't affect Milwaukee, right? It doesn't affect Brookfield, where you're from.
Yeah.
It doesn't affect the vast majority of the land space, maybe necessarily of populated Madison and Green Bay and stuff, but for much of western and perhaps northern Wisconsin, it's important.
Big issue. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. So I guess I'll start with that one and then go to healthcare. I remember, I think the first real event we did on the campaign was going up to Kewaunee County, where their number one issue, in the words of one person, was SHIT.
Really, it's okay. You can swear. We're not on public airwaves.
That's true.
Right. It's cow shit.
Yeah.
Right.
That is their number one issue, because you have the manure that's seeping into the groundwater, and it's really a big issue, and most people there use well water. And for the farmers, they need a place to keep all of the the manure, shall we say. And often what happens is they just end up kind of spreading it out on their fields. And so this is a huge issue. If you haven't been to some parts of rural Wisconsin and talked with people, you'll definitely do that, because you'll hear how much this really is top of mind. And I think one of the things that can be really helpful, and this is not only a federal issue, it's actually very much a county issue and a local issue,
right,
is farmers do need help from county governments to get the funding so they can have more sustainable practices for the disposal of manure. And we've been to farms where you'll see these giant containers. We're talking bigger than what are those things? Water towers, I guess. Yeah, bigger than those that I've seen out on dairy farms, and they need help. And so I would certainly support conservation and sustainability funding to help at the county level. But I also think that one of our principles of the campaign is the people closest to the issues should be informing policy.
Right.
And so I'm not going to be developing legislation on this in Washington, D.C. I'm going to be talking with local environmental advocates as well as farmers to find a solution that both allows farmers to do their jobs while also protecting water quality at the same time.
Right. And there's so many topics like that. And that, like you said, they're local, they're county, they're state, they're federal. One of the experiences for me that was very similar was with, I think it was Menominee County, I want to say, just north of Green Bay,
Sure.
talking about PFAS, PFAS, and the forever chemicals. And listen, at the end of the day, they're cancerous, and we're now looking at parts per trillion of acceptable or zero. They're causing weird, bizarre cancers, testicular cancers, and stuff like that. But it's also Teflon. It's also fire retardant in our clothes, in our kids' clothes.
That's right.
It's the firefighting foam that firefighters use to put out fires. So it does also amazing things for society.
Yeah.
And it also happens to be invading our drinking water and killing people. Okay.
Yeah.
How do we deal with that? And in Wisconsin, we've got close to 100 sites, I think, that are known to be contaminated with these forever chemicals, the PFAS. And I think across the country, it's like 2,800 sites.
Sure.
Okay, well, this is local, this is county, this is state, this is federal. Who do we bring in? How do we clean it up? What do we do? And also, how do we, and it goes to your point with manure, is we still need farming, we still need beef, we still,
That's right.
And so all of that still comes into play.
Yeah.
We're not going to cut out beef.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not going to cut out beef. Actually, Tanya's over there making steaks right now. But those are, again, it's the dominoes, it's the who's involved, it's who's locally affected by it, who knows more about it, and then how do we go about best practices and a solution.
That's right. Yeah. Now for healthcare, I'll give the quick version on this one, and then tie to actually one of the core issues of our campaign. So just like any system, if there's a profit motive to do something, most people are going to do it. And right now, the healthcare system is making money on volume as opposed to health. And so you've got doctors who are great people, but at the same time, benefit more when they keep you in the system as opposed to keeping you healthy out of the system. Now, so we need to change those incentives so that there's a greater incentive for the healthcare system to actually invest in preventative health and keeping you healthy. So that's number one. The second thing is, I do think that healthcare is a human right. You hear that from all the Democrats. But I'd go even further. I think that guaranteeing healthcare is good for entrepreneurship. It's good for the economy as well. I'm someone who has been an entrepreneur, created an organization from scratch, from the garage band stage to being a multi-million-dollar organization. And I remember first as an entrepreneur, the decision to take the leap of faith is often partially dependent, at least, on what happens to your healthcare and your benefits. Right. And so I'm focused very heavily on creating a system of portable benefits and longer term decoupling healthcare from employment. So people are more free to do what's purposeful and meaningful for them without losing their healthcare benefits. But by the way, it's not only healthcare, it's retirement benefits, long-term and short-term disability. And then the final thing is a huge part of the healthcare system is this runaway inflation for drug prices and drug costs. And that's why one thing we can do that's very popular is allowing Medicare to negotiate with drug companies. And the only reason why it doesn't happen, even though it's widely supported by the American public, is because the system of legalized bribery in Congress. And I just want to be a little bit more specific there with everyone. Right now, you have to pay a price just to get on certain committees. And if the committee is more lucrative in terms of the interests involved, you have to pay a higher price. And the money for that usually comes from the special interest groups. So that's one reason why special interests totally run Washington. On top of that, you've got lobbyists who can directly fund politicians as well. So that's why I'm calling to ban lobbyists from funding members of Congress and end the practice of charging for committee assignments. And I announced earlier this week on MSNBC that I will not be voting for Chuck Schumer as the next Democratic leader unless he ends the system of legalized bribery.
Right, and that's a component I wasn't familiar with. I am familiar with a bunch of the other stuff. And it's easy when we talk about lobbyists. And I see this question all the time. I'm sure you do, right? Is it's this negative perception? But I want to emphasize that not all lobbyists are evil. Not all lobbyists are bad.
They're public interest lobbyists.
Right,
absolutely.
Right, because there are lobbyists for the LGBT community. There are lobbyists for the list goes on. Right, it doesn't matter whether it's again, pick a topic. There's conflict. Sometimes, right? And we as Democrats might say, okay, the gun lobby is evil, or the drug lobby, or whatever. But part of the real challenge, and we've seen this running for office, is everybody has their own question and their own right. We just were asked about manure digesters.
That's right.
And it's impossible for us to know all the details of all the topics. It's why I had a research team. I'm assuming that you've got people on your staff that do research. It's why a U.S. Senator's budget for their staff is like $3.4 million.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? $3.4 million, because we need so many people to be able to research and understand this. But lobbyists are not always evil. But the money component is what changes the math.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Right? Because you're exactly right. They're public interest lobbyists who do great work. Now, when you have money in the equation, the drug companies are going to have a lot more influence than, someone who's trying to represent rural nurses, for example. And that's why I think that this proposal is not going to unemploy lobbyists writ large. It just means that the tools you're going to use are going to be based information, arguments, as opposed to money. And that's going to actually help level the playing field so that the more public interest lobbyists, for example, on the student loan crisis, there are people I know who are trying to lobby in favor of young people to ensure that student loan debt is not one of the only forms of debt that for which you can't declare bankruptcy.
Right.
And the only reason why that imbalance is there is because of the money. So I think we're going to even it out. One funny story on this point, I was speaking to a group in Milwaukee, and I gave my proposal on lobbyists, and there is a lobbyist in the room, and I had to say, I'm not taking away your job. I'm just taking away the financial tool that you have.
Right. Well, and again, there's so many components of these. We talk about, and we can go on. Somebody asked, thank you so much for doing this live. Is he planning on doing more vids to get his message out? I'm sure that he will. Absolutely. And again, we really want to get him to 1,000 followers, and that's why I'm trying to help candidates. Somebody asked who I'm endorsing, and somebody's like, well, clearly Steven. and I haven't officially endorsed anybody. I appreciate Steven very much, and we have so much in common. And I would absolutely love to see him win, and I think he could really beat Ron Johnson. But the how are you going to do this? How do you get your message out? How are you going to get your message out? Steven, like all the other candidates, right? He's been out all day long, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Right? Because he didn't get here to my house until almost 4:30, and it is a 16-hour a day job, somewhere in that range, depending on how much time you're putting into fundraising, and it's all across the state. Right, and he said he's Western Wisconsin and Northern Wisconsin, and those people matter, and have vastly different issues, vastly different concerns, as do people from suburban Franklin here, where we are, to the central city. The videos are tough; they're time consuming. To get them done well, right? And I'm not talking the professional grade. I've gone through 3 different video crews, talking the professional grade, multiple camera and stuff like that. But even just doing a simple TikTok video of 3 minutes is an hour's worth of time. Right. In my experience, right? With editing, and you want captions in there so that people, it's closed captioning, and it picks up the words and the terms and does all the things. And maybe you want a graphic or something like that, and then you need some. It's just time consuming.
Right.
And that's where it's, and they're difficult to do individually, right? And I assume your camera crew doesn't live with you.
Right.
Right. And so part of what I'm trying to do with this is to make this easy. And again, if we can get him live, then he and I could have done this. He could have done it from his house. I could have done it here, and same conversation. Yeah. Which is what I want more candidates to do, so that they can do more of this with you guys. And then ideally, I would love, for example, in Wisconsin, where the state assembly, you've got 3 state assembly candidates underneath the state senate.
Right.
I would love those people to be able to have conversations with each other.
Absolutely.
Because they're dealing with all the same people, right?
Yeah.
But now if you know that your state assembly and state senate candidate are talking with each other, or for your race, for you to be able to do this with Ann Rowe, who is running for 1st Congressional District, right, would be a terrific opportunity of how do these 2 parts of government work together? If she's going to be in the House, you're going to be in the Senate.
That's right.
Or if you wanted to work with Jillian Bettino as the treasurer, great.
Absolutely.
How does the U.S. Senate potentially interact with the state of Wisconsin?
That's right.
That's a terrific conversation that you're never going to hear, right? And Steven's never going to do a video on, because it's not something that most people would think about, but it gives you the opportunity to see a couple of the candidates interacting with each other, talking about ideas, expressing and explaining how the state works, or the assembly works, or the Senate works, or whatever, and how that relationship can work. So that's what I'm trying to do, and what I'm trying to encourage. And somebody said, what sets Steven apart from Mandela Barnes or other Democratic candidates? He's here. That's one of the things that sets him apart. I offered this up to all of the U.S. Senate candidates. And like I said, I've also offered it up to a number of other candidates across the state. Tom Nelson took me up on it, and I did a brief live with him. Mandela Barnes he and I have talked, and here was my requirement. I said I wanted an hour of his time. I haven't heard from him since. So I think that's a distinction. Yeah. And I get it. He's the lieutenant governor, he's busy, and that goes to some of the other things that you've talked about. Is it'd be nice if politicians weren't campaigning while we're paying them.
Yes.
But So he's he's lieutenant governor, he's got a job and responsibilities. He's, of course, all across the state. I'm offering up 30,000 people that are here on TikTok, and what I wanted was an hour of his time to get to know him, just to ask some questions so that we could do this effectively.
Sure.
I've reached out, I've talked with Alex Lasry's campaign a couple of times, and they've texted me back and forth and stuff like that, and I haven't heard from them in the last 3 weeks. Now, they're coming up in the primary, you guys, right? We've got 3 weeks till the primary, just under. So I get it, everybody's balls to the wall busy. But I've got 30,000 people that want to engage.
That's right.
And Sarah Godlewski's campaign has never responded to me at all.
Wow.
So I think that's an interesting distinction right there, is the people that are here on TikTok, and this is political consultants, and I had this when I ran in 2020, is somebody said to me, a consultant that does statewide races, and he and I have talked since, and he gave me a little grief for giving him some public grief like this.
Huh.
But he said, Adam, likes don't vote.
Yeah.
Likes don't vote. So his point is social media doesn't matter. I disagree.
I disagree too.
I hope to disagree. But I think part of the reason that likes don't vote is a philosophy for political consultants is because they don't engage.
They're cut out of the process.
Right. It's their money, right? This is free. I spent no money on TikTok.
Yeah.
Right? We have spent no money doing this, and we've, there's 4,400 or 4,100 likes on here, however many people have come through. They don't get any of that money.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that candidates don't engage on social media. If you look at most social medias, and I'll use this race as an example. If you look at Mandela Barnes, Tom Nelson, Sarah Godlewski, Alex Lasry, there are very few responses in their social media, right?
Yeah.
Whether we're talking Twitter or Facebook, or the few that are on TikTok, they don't respond.
Right.
Which means they're not engaging. I've said any of the people that want to work with me, that's the requirement, is you have to be willing to engage.
That's right.
You have to be willing to answer questions. I had somebody who I'd started to work with, and at one point in time, so I was giving some advice, and their response was, we already have a communication strategy. I need to know how to get people on TikTok to knock on doors and donate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fail.
Very transactional.
Right. Very transactional.
Yeah.
And what it comes down to for me is looking down the road.
Yes.
It's very easy for a politician to, I'm only focused on this race. Steven is not. Yes, he's focused on this race, but he's looking at changing the system. I'm looking at trying to change politics, trying to change the interaction between voters who don't trust politicians and don't trust the government, to create a sense of trust. And the only way that sense of trust comes is from looking at the camera and talking with people.
That's right.
Right? Words are 7% of communication. Voice is another 38% of communication. 55% of communication is your body language.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, on video, we can do body language, we can do voice, you can do words, you can hear them all. And that's the distinction, I think, in this particular race, for me, is I offered for free. I'm not charging anybody for this, right? Steven's not paying for my time. 30,000 people, and most of the candidates ignored it.
Wow. I'll share one fun story related to your point here, which is now that absentee ballots are being sent out to people, there are voters who are taking the time to learn about different candidates, and a lot of people, they learn about us. Certainly a lot more people have learned about us after the debate, and it worked in our favor that the debate was rebroadcast on Monday evening. So we're getting a lot of people coming in and sending notes on every social media platform. And one that stands out to me was on Instagram, someone saying, really loved your message. I had one particular question on X issue. Within 5 minutes, I responded to her, and she said, "That's fantastic. I'm going to be voting for you," and telling all my friends. And I remember thinking to myself,
that works.
Yeah, that is a revolution in itself, where voters can reach out directly to candidates and have maybe a follow-up question and get that information, if you're responsive, very quickly. And to me, it was an honor to have that opportunity to engage with a voter like that. And we've had many more opportunities of people reaching out, and that, I think, is the spirit of what you're talking about, is being responsive. And I put myself, I remember, being, 10 years ago, when I mentioned voting for Russ Feingold in 2010, and you know, for the other elections that year, I think about, you know, if I were able to just text someone or engage on social media and get a response quickly, how cool that would be.
Right.
Now I'm more involved in politics where I actually can probably talk directly with a lot of people, but I just put myself in the shoes of a voter, having that kind of direct engagement with a candidate. It's cool, and I think it's a missed opportunity for anyone who doesn't take advantage.
It's a huge missed opportunity, and I had 3 times. So when some of my first videos went super viral, 400,000 views in a week, which was ridiculous on game theory and the infrastructure bill.
That's awesome.
I spent so much time responding to people, commenting, replying back, that TikTok blocked me.
Really?
From my own videos. TikTok blocked me from responding to my own videos for 24 hours because I was commenting too much. Right? I had no idea this even existed. And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. Literally hundreds of people are asking questions on the video. I am responding from my own account. And TikTok's like, nope, you're done. Now, admittedly, that took like 4 hours and hundreds of, I mean, it was crazy. And I've had that happen 3 times where TikTok blocked me. But it's what creates engagement.
Right.
And I said at the beginning of this, it also creates an incredible learning opportunity for a candidate because once you start to see these same questions come up now, I can change my commentary, change my message to already address those issues.
Exactly.
So that it's already there, and whether that's somebody that agrees with me or disagrees or just wants more information. But if it's somebody that disagrees with me and now I know and I've seen it 15 times, now I can build that in so that the next person, I've already defeated their argument or addressed their concern, however you want to look at it, depends on how aggressive we want to be, before they even get to it, which is incredibly powerful persuasion technique.
It is, yeah.
Right? If we can address your questions before you ask them, because 400 other people have already asked it.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly powerful tool. And your comment about the person that was like, I'm going to vote for you, I had that all the time. And it's not as convenient here on TikTok to do a video response because they're public.
Right.
Although I have, like, if the same question comes up, I'll use it and you can see the question. But I've done it on Facebook several times with a private response. So somebody comments or somebody throws you a question. And for me, and I think with you, all of your social medias, except messaging.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
So many of them block it. You can't even message them.
That's crazy, yeah.
But I'll do video responses to people because I've got my phone.
Yeah,
right? And it's
cool.
30 seconds. It can be in the car. It doesn't have to be in depth. And I have had people, one person was like, I am keeping this forever, right? Nice. Which is so cool. But that's the person that's going to turn around and tell their friends.
Yes.
That's going to talk to their family. And that's an incredibly powerful political tool. And so what I've said is that we're at in my opinion, the next political media revolution.
Yeah, I can mention the same thing.
Yeah, so we had radio, we had television, we had social media. Now we've got unlimited data right here. We can pull up and create a video in a matter of minutes if we don't care about some ums and abdabobs and stuff like that. And if you're willing to be human, which is, I think, really important. And you can send it to somebody and they can receive it. We couldn't do this consistently 4 or 5 years ago. Right? Now our ability to be able to respond, and that's what I would love to be able to see. And I think that's, like I said, I think it's one of the things that distinguishes what Steven's doing, is an engagement.
Yeah, goes back to the joy of campaigning.
It's fun.
I enjoy it.
Right.
You should enjoy it if you're running for office. So this is fantastic.
All right, I'm going to throw one last question at you, and this is somebody came up, and it came up because of this was the moment of the debate.
Oh.
Somebody said, did Sarah Godlewski not vote in 2016?
So the answer to that question is yes.
She did not vote in 2016.
That's right. Now, in terms of debate strategy, I'm still not sure why Tom used
I ripped it apart. That was the stupidest damn thing. And I have said, I think Tom Nelson is one of the most dedicated public servants. He is incredibly dedicated to the people and the unions and the community that he works for, 100%. That was a stupid strategic move.
Yeah.
Because, and I've talked with other politicians about this when we talk strategy, especially of attacking another candidate.
Right.
You have to anticipate what their response is going to be.
Absolutely.
And build in your response to defeat that.
Yeah. And I also think that, so yeah.
What did you do? Because we on TV, all we got to see was the Tom Nelson or then Sarah Godlewski. I would have been on the floor laughing.
Yeah, I think I was smiling and enjoying it. By the way, one other thing that probably didn't come across on television is I was the only candidate who wasn't feverishly writing on my note page the whole time. I was intently listening to every single candidate when they were talking, including when Tom lodged this attack against Godlewski.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it was unwise on his part, but also certainly to the question that's asked. Godlewski did not vote in 2016, and I don't think her explanations for that are very satisfying. But the broader point here is, I think when you decide to critique another candidate, and I think there's people often say like, oh, I don't do negative campaigning, and we're not either, certainly. But drawing a contrast on issues is important. So I think the key to calling people to that higher level and staying in that dignified space is by critiquing a candidate on an issue in service of your mission. And I think that's what was missing maybe with Tom's approach there. When I did, critique people, I'm trying to think, I mentioned the climate example. I kind of critiqued everyone when I said, you can say nice things on this stage, but there's a huge gap between that and passing legislation. Each of my critiques were all in service of the larger mission of our campaign.
Right. I was often critical, and like I said, I did live during it, so I kind of analyzed it, and I've got it up on Facebook Live, TikTok Live. They don't make accessible afterwards for general viewing. But my critiques were often strategic.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Or not even critiques, but just greater explanation of whatever the topic was.
Sure.
Right.
That's great.
Because again, these guys had a minute, so I might have explained some of the things that they were talking about where it's difficult to do. But yeah, that was a flub. That was a poor strategic choice, and I said before all of it that the two candidates that would be punching at people were going to be Tom Nelson and Sarah Godlewski.
Right.
Alex Lasry and Mandela Barnes had no reason to even acknowledge that these guys existed.
Right.
Right. They're ahead in the polls. If you watch Alex Lasry, I don't think he moved his head and looked at any of the other candidates. And I don't know that I'm exaggerating.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
I'm sure that his political consultants told him nobody else exists.
Right.
And there's strategic logic to that. Mandela Barnes was more engaging, but also probably relatively dismissive of the other three. He believes he's got one challenge. Alex Lasry, I don't think actually thinks anybody is even a challenge. I mean, and I'm not saying that good or bad. I think there's a different mentality that goes along with you're the 33-year-old senior vice president of the Milwaukee Bucks.
Right. Right.
Again, not being critical, but it was predictable that you weren't going to go after anybody because you've got a very different strategy and political philosophy.
That's right.
That Tom Nelson has been punching since day one and was going to continue against the millionaires and the billionaires.
Yeah.
That Sarah Godlewski was probably going to as well, and she did a little bit swinging back at Tom.
Yeah.
And that the top two, we're going to kind of ignore each other.
Yeah. I think that's fair, and I think one reason, partly, I would have been comfortable naming other candidates, but I didn't for strategic purposes.
Right.
Because when you have 1 hour, you do not want to be giving other candidates
More
any
time.
Additional time.
No, you do not.
Yeah, no need to do that, exactly. But I think the core, if you had to boil down our core themes, it was change the system, real legislative change as opposed to talking about it, and then showing that there are opportunities for Democrats and Republicans to come together. And I think that in my critiques of the other candidates, it was a systemic critique.
Yep.
It was highlighting that all of them are operating as traditional establishment politicians, operating under those incentives, and that those incentives and that behavior is not serving you as a people of Wisconsin. It's not leading to real change. If you just talk about it on a debate stage, that doesn't mean there's going to be legislation passed. And so I hope that all my critiques, I think, kind of ultimately tied back to that.
Yeah, I'm a strategist. I'm a game theory. I'm a chess player, a poker player. Because this race is purple,
Yeah.
right? Because all the recent big statewide races have been won or lost by 1% or less.
That's right.
Right? At least for general elections, in the fall. It means that political consultants, political strategists that have been at this for a long time are unwilling to take a risk.
Exactly.
Because if they take a risk and they lose by 1%, there goes their job, right? There goes their business, there goes everything. The candidate is going to be like, we should have just done things the normal way and we would have won. Well, that's not necessarily true by any stretch of the imagination.
That's right.
But the problem with not taking a risk is that any of the candidates that were up on that stage, and I've said this publicly several times, I think will win or lose by 1% to 2%.
Yeah.
I think some have slightly better chances than others, but when we look at the voters of Wisconsin and we look at the numbers, 47% are going to vote Democrat, 47% are going to vote Republican, and it's this 3, 4, 5%. Are they going to come out? Are they not? Are we going to move some moderate conservatives or not? I don't see any of those candidates moving moderate conservatives.
Exactly.
Steven has that possibility, in my opinion. And it's the same thing that I did in 2020. It's why we moved the numbers by 11%. Well, that would be huge in Wisconsin.
Exactly. One common thing I hear is, well, you'd be a great general election candidate. And I always say, well, let's advance to the general election then.
Right.
Because there is a dichotomy here of you have some of the most partisan activists whose number one goal is to defeat Ron Johnson, but being a super partisan activist is not going to defeat Ron Johnson this year. Now, again,
Which is brutal to say.
It is.
But it's true.
It's true. We have to be honest here. Again, 2018, blue wave, different conversation. I would still argue the style of politics we're talking about is still good even in a 2018 year. But to your point about risk, if a Democratic nominee plays it safe this year, they will lose. I mean, just you look at the math. You look at the data on 2022, the party in power always struggles in the first midterm. On top of that, you have Biden's approval ratings that are now the lowest so far. It's like 36%. And on top of...
Let me say something about that, though.
Yeah.
This is political science and recent study. That's probably going to be about as high as we're ever going to see for anybody anymore.
No, that's a good point as well.
Because we don't have Republicans supporting Democrats. We don't have Democrats supporting Republicans.
Yeah.
It's not like under even Clinton or Obama where there was some overlap. There is almost zero overlap. So the likelihood of us ever seeing anything beyond 45%, because there are always going to be Democrats that don't support the Democratic president or Republicans that don't support the Republican president.
That's right.
So there will always be some, but we see like 3 to 5% support across party. So that's no longer quite as interesting a measure as it used to be.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right. And so the way we shake up the math, and this is my pitch for being the Democratic nominee, is activating the exhausted majority, which are the voters that you're talking about, people who feel politically homeless, politically disaffected, who may not otherwise come out to vote in a midterm election, or who hate choosing between the lesser of two evils in elections. And our campaign is doing that. And I think it's not only because we're talking about changing the system that brings these unlikely coalitions together, it's speaking from the heart. And that gets back to the BS radar we were talking about earlier. When our campaign's able to resonate equally as well in a place like Madison as we are able to in Neillsville, Wisconsin.
And nobody knows where that is.
It's,
Sorry.
in central...
I apologize to Neillsville.
It's, in central Wisconsin and basically other, red and Trump-leaning areas. When we're able to resonate equally as well, it's about something deeper. And when I ask for feedback in those places, it really does come down to that trust, that trust factor. And so, my pitch is, one, who can activate the exhausted majority, which is required to win this year. Two, who has a system change agenda that gets people excited, and we're running on getting big money out of politics. And three is experience, being able to point to this new kind of politics. Because usually the choices you have is the establishment experienced candidate,
right, Right.
Or you have the pure outsider who wants to, kind of burn down or revolutionize the system.
Right. Burn it all down.
And or you have, related to that profile is like you've got the business guy who wants to run. And, the thing is, we can kind of marry experience with revolutionizing the system.
Right.
And I think that's what brings an interesting coalition together. And to the earlier question, what makes me different than someone like Mandela Barnes, it's certainly the exhausted majority, like you're talking about, getting some moderate Republicans or conservatives to support us. But it also is experience. It's being able to point directly to pieces of legislation that embody this new model of politics that we're talking about that have actually passed. And so this is not a purely theoretical pie in the sky kind of idea. This is practical change that we can point to.
Right. And my pitch on things has been, we need to teach people how to talk with each other again.
Yes.
Right. So that gets into messaging, that gets into communication, that gets into persuasion and negotiation. That's not just from the candidate, but getting people to talk with each other. Because I think that's an important part of things too. And so that's why I said it's really interesting for me, where Steven and I have very different perspectives on where we're coming from, but we still end at the same solution.
That's right. That's right.
And why neither of us are particularly, we're not Democrats first. That's somewhere far down the ladder. All right, so I'm down to the phone's hitting red.
Okay.
So this has been super cool, and somebody said, "Are you not accepting requests?" And I apologize. We've got the phone way over there so that both of us can be in it. So I apologize for those of you that were asking to hop in. But TikTok Live in person like this isn't super convenient. So the phone's about 8 feet away. So I'm sorry for that we weren't doing that. All right, Steven.
Thank you. This is fantastic.
I'm glad you
Thank
enjoyed.
you.
We're going to make him do more videos, help him get to 1,000 so that he can do lives. Not that he's not welcome to do them in my living room or my kitchen, but it's probably easier for him given that are you still in Brookfield?
Now in Milwaukee on the east side, but grew up in Brookfield.
Still, he's a good 20-25 minutes away. So let's make life easier for him so that he can answer your questions and help him out. And we've got 3 weeks. The Democratic primary is August 9th. It is arguably the most important race in the state from a Democratic perspective. So please make sure you get out there and vote, because only about 20% do. So your vote is worth a whole lot more in this election. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Let's shock the world.
There you go. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
All right, let me run over there.
Go.
Okay, don't do anything obnoxious. You're still on film, right?
Okay.
Don't say anything that you don't want everybody to hear.
This is awesome.
It's Adam Murphy, former candidate for U.S. Senate here in Wisconsin. And now that I'm not in the race, I'm doing everything I can to encourage candidates to come onto TikTok, to